who was Jesus when I grew up? He was nothing to me. I can remember my mom and my parents were divorced when I was little, and so we had a babysitter. And one day she usually came to our house, but one day we were at her house, and I could not have been 4 or 5 years old. And I'm coming down the stairway in her house, and I look to my left, and there's a fireplace, and there's a picture on the wall above the fireplace, and it caught my eye. And I said, wow. And I actually said it out loud. I didn't know anybody could hear me. I said, wow, who is that? Well, the babysitter heard me say that, and she said, that's the Son of God. And I was like, wow. So I went home and I said, Mom, guess what I saw today? I saw a picture of the Son of God. And she said, oh, we don't believe that. And I said, oh, okay. I didn't ask why. It was just something we didn't ask. We don't believe that. But I did wonder why. And I probably didn't wonder it for more than a few seconds, but life went on. And now Jesus is my life. Yeshua is my life. There's nothing more important to me than he is. I mentioned my parents divorced, and by the end of my high school years, I was bar mitzvahed. I was bar mitzvahed by the vice president of the World Jewish Council, the president of the American Jewish Congress. And I grew up as a Jew. But by the end of my high school years, and I continued studying, considering like being a rabbi even throughout the first part of high school. But by the end of high school, I started to smoke marijuana. And I started to smoke it a lot, like basically every day. And then I went off to college, and my life just fell apart with partying, with drugs, and my life was a mess. And I dropped out of college. I went home. And my stepdad said, Greg, why don't you join the Air Force? It'll make a man out of you. And so I honestly thought he just didn't love me at all to make that suggestion. But what happened was I did join the Air Force because I really had nothing I could do at that point. And the Air Force provided structure to my life, which was very helpful. And at the same time, there was a pilot who would come out, and because I'd be guarding his plane and about half the days, and he'd come out and talk to me just about anything, but he sometimes would talk about the Lord, and he'd bring me a cold drink because it was a hot flight line, and he would ask me questions, and his questions were honoring about Judaism. He would ask me things like, what'd you do for the Sabbath when you were growing up? What'd you do for Passover as you were growing up? And the questions did not seem pushy. It never even occurred to me that they could possibly be evangelistic. That wasn't a question. He was just asking questions, right? And so, they were honoring questions. They were honoring to my heritage. And so one day he invited me to church, and I just felt like I needed to say yes because he was an officer and I was enlisted, and he was friendly to me, and I felt like I should say yes. So I went to church with him, and that Sunday, it was January 17th, 1982, and it was a really eye-opening experience for me. There were times during the service when there would be the speaker was a guest speaker, and the pastor was seated on the platform behind the guest speaker. And there were times when the speaker would do something that I never saw before. He would prophesy during his talk. And when he would do that, the pastor would raise his hand like this. And I'm sitting up at the balcony with my friend, and I'm thinking to myself, I never saw prophecy, never heard of it, And I'd see this prophecy, and I'd literally think to myself, who's this guy waving at? Right? Literally, who's he waving at? And I left there without no idea who he was waving at. And then when that happened, everybody else starts to talk in this other language. I'm thinking to myself, because I had a friend growing up, a really good friend who was Catholic, and I thought, well, they're all talking in Latin. How is it that everybody in this place speaks Latin? They're all talking in tongues, obviously, but I'd never heard of tongues. It's not that I just never heard tongues. I never even heard of them, And so they're all talking in this foreign language, and I'm like, what's going on? But they also had a time during the service when everybody would like greeted and they hugged one another. And there was this lady there who was old enough to be my mother, and she came up to me and she hugged me. And when she hugged me, I really felt like I had an experience that I can't even explain it. I felt like I experienced the presence of God. Sometimes I'll say I was won to the Lord by a hug. Because when that lady hugged me, literally what I said, God, whatever it is these people have, it's evident. They're getting it out of that book. And I will read that book. And I want, whatever it is, I'm going to do it. And so I went home. That was Sunday, January 17th. And I started to read that book, the New Testament. Started with Matthew. And you read the first verse of Matthew, about Yeshua being the son of Abraham and the son of David. And you go, this is pretty Jewish. It's like a really Jewish book. And so it's not what I expected at this point. I'm thinking to myself, the New Testament is not Jewish. Well, this is really Jewish. And so I went back to go see the youth pastor on Friday, January 22nd. And by this point, I said, Pastor, I can tell this Jesus, he's something special. And I just have to do something for him. Is there something around here that I can do? And he looked, and I said, maybe I could take the youth, like teach them how to lift weights or go on bicycle rides, or because I used to do all that kind of stuff when I was younger in the military. And he said, well, maybe instead of doing that, you could go to the young adults meetings and you'd learn more. You'll grow more. I said, that's a great idea. And so I did that. And I don't know if we prayed or not. I'm sure we did, but I really don't remember. What I do remember was when I left there and I started to walk from the church to the bus stop to take the bus back to the base. And I got about a block or two, and it felt like someone dropped a bucket of light. Now imagine water, but it felt like a bucket of light that was just dropped on my head. And my immediate reaction was to break out in a grin. And then I covered my face and looked down because I'm walking down this crowded city street and I'm grinning. And I had been a drug addict. I had been a drug dealer. And drug dealers don't walk through streets grinning like that because they'll call attention to themselves. And I'm trying to hide this like overwhelming joy. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going on here? Right? Well, that pastor in his office had said to me when I saw him, he said, well, how long have you been born again? And I said, born again? I've been coming here since Friday. I'd never heard the words born again. I hadn't gotten to John yet, so I didn't even know what that was. Well, now I'm walking through the street and I'm going, man, I think I'm, whatever that born again is, I think I'm it. Because I feel like I just started over. Like, what was that? Right? And so the next day I go to work and I'm guarding a plane, an entry ramp to get in a different area on the Air Force base, but a different area. And this guy comes up to me and he gives me his restricted area badge to get in to where the planes are at. He was my friend. First time he's seeing me after I've been born again. He looks at me and he says, what happened to you? I didn't say a word. I had not a word. He just looks at me. What happened to you? Either you just got married or you just got born again. And I looked back and I said, well, I didn't get married. I knew I was born again. And I started to tell everybody about the Lord, and including my family. I told my family about it, and so I know my mom got really upset. My mom said to me, are you saying my mother's in hell? And I don't think I said anything like that, right? But Jewish people, we have this idea. I don't think I said anything like that, but she thought I said that, right? That's what she heard, but it didn't come out of my mouth. And my dad, my stepdad, he got real upset. My grandfather, he got real upset. My grandfather, who I loved, in fact, a number of years later, we have 5 kids, and our 4th kid we named our 4th kid after my grandfather. But my grandfather, when I accepted the Lord, he literally put his hands around my neck, like to choke me. He was, because he was like Holocaust era. and he lost his family, the whole family in Germany. And so, but over time, what happened was, I don't know if my stepdad accepted the Lord. I don't know, but I can tell you that his disposition towards me near the end of his life was very different. And I tend to think he may have, but what happened was, at some point in this process, my stepdad said to me, Greg, it's an unseemly thing for a son to try to change his father's religion. But I can tell you, he treated me differently. At some point that became evident. My mother, though, after my stepdad had passed away, she clearly received the Lord. And in fact, not only did she say it, but she entered a time where she seemed to have dementia the last few years of her life. And the last time I saw my mother alive, my wife and I were in a hospital room, and I was standing on the side of her bed, and I was feeding her in the hospital. And during that time, my mother literally looked away from the side of her bed, away from me, looked straight in front of her. And my wife and I heard my mother say, Jesus, would you take good care of my son? He's a good man. That's the last time I was with my mother, right? I know my mother is in heaven. And then my sister, I got saved in 1982. On Thanksgiving Day in 1992, 10 years to the day. My mom took 28 years, but 10 years to the day 10 years after I got saved on Thanksgiving Day. And then 1 year later, they received the baptism in the Holy Spirit, and they spoke in tongues 1 year later, right? And so that's my sister. And then my kids, we have 5 kids, all 5 of them and their spouses have testimonies of Yeshua. And then I have 12 grandkids. Can you believe I have 12 grandkids? I literally have, some of them are like my youngest grandkid's 5, my oldest grandkid's 16. All of my grandkids have a testimony of Yeshua. I literally have no one in my family now who does not have a testimony of faith in Yeshua. No one, right? I had 10 years where there was literally no one. Sometimes I would teach on 1 Thessalonians 4, and how when Jesus comes back, God will bring with Yeshua those who sleep in Christ. I literally would say that there's nobody in heaven in my family that I knew of. But now I can say there's people in heaven. I didn't say they go into hell. I don't know that. That's up to God, right? But this idea that there's people in heaven in my family, I know that. One other thing, I don't tell this story often, this part of my testimony, but I love this part of it. After I gave my life to the Lord, a couple years later, whatever, I'm going through my stuff. Sometimes you just go through your things, and I go through, and I find this little Gideon's New Testament, these little Bibles, the little New Testament only. And I find a little Gideon's New Testament. Now, I had 5 years of my life that were really encumbered by drugs, not alcohol, just drugs. I was a cocaine addict, marijuana. These things were every day, and I was a mess. This was basically my last year of high school, and then for a few years after that. And so I don't have a lot of memories of a lot of those years. But after I got saved, I'm going through my stuff, and I find a little Gideon's New Testament. I don't remember doing this, but I saw this in my handwriting, my signature, and I dated it. And then next to the date, I wrote Yom Kippur. I have no memory of this, but God got a hold of my life while I was a drug addict. And I signed that thing. And a few years later, he got my attention. He took it to heart, and he became a father to the fatherless, because that's what I was, right? And he worked in my life. And so I am the most thankful person that you will ever meet. God is my father. I grew up, my relationship with my stepdad was very rough. I have no relationship at all with my biological father or his side of the family. They all left with the divorce, but God became my father. And so that's my family.